everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heidi from My Reading Life, obviously. And I am here today to film my rankings for my BookTube Prize judging from the last round, which was the quarterfinals. I was judging Nonfiction Group A. So a lot of great books in this round as well. I think that the nonfiction group in general, like the nonfiction side of the BookTube Prize this year is just, it's just banging, as the kids would say. The books are just so great. And this group was really great as well. And so I just want to put this out here right from the beginning. Like, all of these books are good books. None of these books were bad books, but I had to rank them from 6 to 1. So I'm just going to do that now. So the book that I put in the number 6 spot, not to say that it's a bad book, but just to say it was my least favorite of the bunch. And that is The Dead Are Arising by Payne and Tamara Payne. So this is a biography of Malcolm X. I did not know anything beyond the absolute basics about Malcolm X. I've never read his autobiography. I've never read any other works of scholarship about Malcolm X. Everything that I know about Malcolm X, I have gleaned from, you know, basically pop culture, social media, stuff over the years, because Malcolm X tends to be less taught about in the US than, say, Martin Luther King Jr. or some other big figures in the civil rights movement. So I was glad to be able to read this book and to sort of like get a baseline established for myself about the life of Malcolm X. That being said, the problems that I had with this book were, I felt it was overly detailed, but not in a way that made me connect with Malcolm X. Like, I think the author did a really good job of like laying out what happened to Malcolm X throughout his entire life and what things he was involved in. But I never felt like I got to know Malcolm X personally. And maybe that's just the nature of the beast. Maybe he didn't leave anything. I mean, I know he has an autobiography, but maybe he was a contained person in terms of his emotions. Like, throughout the first part of the book, we're learning about Malcolm X's childhood. He was not a nice kid. He got up to a lot of trouble. He did not treat his family very well. He did not treat his mother very well. And after his father died in an accident, but we never got any reason why, like, other than that was he just non-emotional? Did he just not have any compassion whatsoever for the other members of his family? We don't really know. Like, we know the facts of what happened, but we don't know, like, why he did certain things. And I found that really hard to connect with. Like, emotionally, I found it really hard to connect with because Malcolm X was not a nice person, especially when he was younger. So, and then, you know, so you get all of that. And then in his young adulthood, after he moves to the city and he gets involved in things that he shouldn't be involved in, and he ends up in jail and then converts to the Nation of Islam, and then becomes involved in civil rights stuff. I just felt it was too little of the personal. I also felt like things were reported in the book, but then no information was given about how that came to be. Like, for example, when Malcolm X was in prison, he just quit drugs and cigarettes cold turkey. And he was quite a smoker and quite a drug user and quite a drinker. And he just quit all of that stuff cold turkey. But we're not given any, like, no background. Like, how did he decide to do that? I mean, I know it was part of his conversion to the Nation of Islam and to learning about the being a Muslim and all of that. I understand that, but like, no information about how that worked. Did he get sick? You know, none of the emotional content around something that momentous do we learn about. So that, just too little of the personal for me, too little of the emotional. I just felt like I couldn't connect with it. But very well written, super informative. So that's what I think about The Dead Are Arising. Then in the number 5 position, I placed, obviously I read it, Fevers, Feuds, and Diamonds, Ebola, and the Ravages of History by Paul Farmer. This book also extremely detailed, huge chunky piece of nonfiction, written in a much more academic manner, which I think does not help. It became quite repetitive. Certain words and phrases were repeated throughout the narrative. The very first section really gets into the 2014 Ebola epidemic in West Africa. Paul Farmer is involved in public health and Doctors Without Borders, and so he has a lot of information about, you know, the worldwide reaction to this Ebola outbreak. And he very much, the message of this book is very much that public policy and public health has been very directed towards containing Ebola rather than treating the people who have Ebola. Like, as far as like direct care to people who have contracted the disease, it's not so much that. It's more about controlling the spread of the disease by isolating people who have contracted it. And so that message and whether or not that is a ethical and moral way to deal with a transmittable disease is very much a theme in this book. And I appreciated that very much. But then the second section, which is the longest section, goes into the history of conflict in the region of West Africa, from the time of slavery up through present day. And it's extremely detailed and goes into like every faction and every group of like guerrilla fighters and, you know, just in detail ad nauseum. I just thought it was way too detailed, just too much for me in that section. It was too much to keep straight, too much information. And it felt like a entirely separate book, which other people have mentioned as well. And then the third section is about the diamond trade and war and disease and how those things interact together in more modern time in the last couple of decades. This really could have been 3 books, as many other people have pointed out. I don't think it's a bad book by any means, but it is super detailed and very sort of written in an academic way. And I felt like what I wanted was what the first part of the book was about, and then I didn't so much want what the rest of the book was about. So that was number 5 position for me. Then in the 4th position was Minor Feelings by Cathy Park Hong. I listened to this on audiobook. It is basically a collection of essays about the author's experience growing up Asian American in the United States, and also interspersed her reflections on art and artists and being a writer and how that all impacted her life. I really enjoyed the essays that are about her experience of being Asian American, her reflections on racial inequities, particularly as they apply to Asian Americans and people from all of Asia, not just, you know, certain countries in Asia. I thought that those sections were really, really good and really emotionally impactful. But then the essays that were more about art and the art world and her experiences in college, and especially as they related to art, I didn't care for those as much. So I as with a lot of essay collections, it was uneven for me. Some really hit me and then some did not. So that ended up in the 4th place for me. Then in number 3, so these are the 3 books that I voted to move on. We'll see if I was right or not. So Hidden Valley Road, Inside the Mind of an American Family by Robert Kolker. This was really excellent. I listened to this on audio and read it. So like while I was on a road trip, I was listening to parts of this. And then in the evenings in the hotel room, I was like reading out of the book. This is great. Really, really great reportage of this one particular family, the Galvin family, who after World War II have 12 children, 10 boys, and then 2 girls right at the end. And 6 of the boys end up in their lifetime being diagnosed with schizophrenia. And so this book details not only what happens within the family, but also talks about the development of our understanding of and treatment of schizophrenia and other mental health illnesses. So things that I loved about this, like I love like learning more about the history of treatment of mental illness. This family is just unbelievable, mind-blowingly awful what happens in this family and how the parents react to it. Like riveting stuff, but just horrendous, like or content warnings, I should say, for like sexual abuse, violence, like really awful stuff, mental illness stuff. the parents are infuriating because they do not want to acknowledge what is going on with their children. So that's all very, very compelling. This also takes place in Colorado Springs, which I lived in Colorado Springs for a while, so I loved the setting. I loved like hearing about places that I was familiar with. I enjoyed that. And I just think that the author did such a good job of researching this, like following this family, like interviewing everyone involved, getting consent from all the members of the family to like tell their story, talking with the researchers and the other folks involved in the medical field about treatment options and why certain things were done when, and how treatment options have been developed over time. So the science behind what we know about what happens with folks that suffer from these kind of illnesses. Just very, very well done. Excellent type of journalism that I really think is, the kind of stuff that I really like to read. So this was definitely a book for me. And so I put this in the 3rd position. Then in spot number 2, I have the address book, What Street Addresses Reveal About Identity, Race, Wealth, and Power by Deirdre Mask. I had this book in the first round and I have it in the next round. So you're going to hear me talk about this book lots of times. So I won't go into it in too much detail, but the subtitle says exactly what this is about. And what I like about this is the global perspective. I thought this was going to be based in Western, mostly US and UK geography, but it's not. It takes place all over the world. And I just want to read to you there's 5 different sections that these like basically essays are put into. So the first one is development, the second one is origins, the third one is politics, the fourth one is race, and then the 5th one is class and status. And so the author goes into how addresses, physical addresses, apply in each of those categories, basically. And she uses examples from all over the world, from India, Africa, Europe, United States, Japan. Like, she talks about, just so much history, not only history of like the development of cities and how cities are laid out, like physically, but also like socially, how people were grouped geographically and why, and how that has implications into the future and what it means today, what it means to have or not to have an address, a physical address, what things are available to you and not available to you depending on whether or not you have an address, like Western versus Eastern philosophy around addressing was super interesting. There's like just really, really interesting book that brings in a lot of different disciplines to address the topic. So it's not just a book about social issues, although those are certainly in there. It's not just a book about like geography, although that's in there. It's history, it's philosophy, it's racial issues, it's social justice issues. It's like all of these things in one book. And it's just really, really interesting and very engaging. The writer, Deirdre Mask, the author, writes in a very engaging style, and I just enjoy this book tremendously. And I think that it teaches a lot as well. So it's an enjoyable learning experience, which is my favorite thing in nonfiction. And then in the first spot, of course, is The Next Great Migration, The Beauty and Terror of Life on the Move by Sonia Shah. I'm a big Sonia Shah fan. I loved her book, Pandemic, which I read twice now. And then this book I was very excited to read, so I was thrilled when it ended up in my group this time. And, this is the history and the implications of human migrations throughout, since humans first emerged from wherever, and how that has impacted the earth over time. And Sonia Shah does also use animal migrations to illustrate her points as well, which I think is really, really good. And I almost wish there was even more. I wish this book was longer because I really enjoyed it that much. The thing that put this into the top spot for me over the address book and Hidden Valley Road was that my mind, this is one of those books that expanded my mind. This is one of the books that took concepts that I was aware of and broadened them for me, and light bulbs came on, and aha moments happened and all that sort of thing. And because the science of this kind of information about what we know about migration, what we know about human evolution, and how humans have moved around the globe over history has changed so much in the years since I left college, which was now many, many years ago since I was in college. This book just blew my mind. And that is, when a book does that, I just, it always is going to get top ranks for me. I just kept thinking the whole time I was reading this book, like, this is so different from what we knew back in the 90s and the 80s. This is just like, we have enhanced our knowledge of these topics so much, and it's just so fascinating. And Sonia Shah does a great job of laying out really complex information in a way that is very understandable to the public, in a way that is engaging, in a way that really makes you think about why it is we do the things that we do, why governments are structured the way that they are, what is ethical and moral about certain things or not ethical and moral about certain things. I think there's heartbreaking writing in here about current migration issues and how migrants are being treated that just breaks your heart. It's just horrific. So for the book that taught me the most and expanded my mind the most, this book wins the prize, and then therefore is in my number one spot for my grouping. Unfortunately, not everyone agreed with me. So this book makes it through, of course, because I have it in my group again next time. But all of my beloved nature nonfiction is out of the BookTube prize, not just in this group, but in all groups across the board. I am so sad about it, because there was some absolutely brilliant and gorgeous science and nature nonfiction in the long list of the BookTube prize this time around, and it breaks my heart that they're gone. But so many people did read them because of the BookTube prize, so I'm grateful for that. So I will be back at the end of the next round with my rankings for, again, Nonfiction Group A. So for semifinals, I have Nonfiction Group A, and there will be some familiar books in that group. Let me just see from my notes. So this one, obviously, is in my group. The Dead Are Rising is in my group, and Cast by Isabel Wilkerson, which I read prior to the BookTube prize this year, is in my group. So I've read 3, and then the other 3 are The Dragons, the Giant, the Women by Wayette Moore, Notes on a Silencing by Lacey Crawford, and Our Bodies, Their Battlefields by Christina Lamb. Those are the books in my group, so I will be coming back to you in 2 months to talk about those. Please do check out the BookTube prize website. I'll link it down below for all the information about fiction and nonfiction. It's just such a great opportunity to be able to participate in the BookTube prize judging. I love it. I have such a great time. I'm introduced to so many books I wouldn't otherwise get to. Robert's doing an amazing job and working so hard to have this prize and to even grow it. So just thanks again, Robert, for the opportunity to participate. And I hope you all can find some books within the BookTube prize that you think sound interesting and you'd like to read. Until the next one, I'll talk to you later.